Hey guys, this is Kirop speaking, and in today's video we are going to provide you with a nice juicy long Q&A session after releasing that last little dev update that wasn't so little. There will be many questions about campaign, all kinds of mechanics, simulation aspects, and so on. And I'm being joined by Chris in order to get through it all. Enjoy!
Welcome everybody to our Al-Rilma Update Dev Q&A live stream for April, or actually now May of 2025. Thank you all for attending. Just to remind everybody of the format, it's going to be a quick question and answer session. We're going to do about 2 hours of questions. If you'd like to ask a question once again, make a request to speak in the channel or type it into the chat window and we kind of follow along with those. So we'll be answering everybody's questions as best as we can. And it looks like we have our first question coming up here from Texas Slav.
So my question is about a long-awaited feature that Killerob has commented on in his latest little dev update, the continuous VVL. And
Right, yes.
I apologize if it was directly or indirectly answered in the video, but I'd like to ask about the extent of the availability of that. What are the plans for where it'll be available and when it'll be available? What are the restrictions on valvetrain? And how much, this is kind of a part 2, but how much of an impact do you expect on this feature helping emissions for somewhat higher camshaft durations or camshaft settings?
Right, so the implementation of it is basically that you do not get different cam profiles, but rather you get the effect, the mechanical effect of what is being implemented is that the cam profile is being, as is, pushed further in towards the valve, so that you do get more lift while retaining the profile. So that is quite different from having 2 different profiles or, in fact, a continuously variable profile. It is not the same thing, but it does combine with VVT. So that is something to consider. That's in its benefit. But overall, what that means is that it is not quite as potent as VVL is, which means that VVL is still the go-to performance choice because you can't replace the
Duration advantages.
So, exactly. Yes, right. The duration matters a lot for a high RPM operation, of course. So, right. But it is very hard on the engineering side. So you do pay a lot of engineering time, additional weight, additional production units, and it is excellent as an economy choice while also extending your power band, flattening your power band and extending it to slightly higher rev range for the cam profile that you have selected. And just to reiterate from the video, you do only select one cam profile there, and then it is assumed that it is varied around that in terms of lift. Every cam profile that you set in automation is coming with a certain lift assumed. This is all fudge. This is not like a value we put on there, like, oh, this is a lift of 7 millimeters or something. That's not how it works. But the effects can be simulated to some extent. So overall, it is mostly an economy and kind of luxury choice because it's so nice for the cam curve or for the torque curve, flattening it out, making it smoother. You don't get the harsh step. Also, you do get significantly better economy off throttle. And overall, that is probably a viable choice, but it's a costly one. And that's basically its place. I think it is coming in around the year, was it 1998 or something like this? I would have to check the specifics, but that's around where where I think I've set it. And that's open for debate and tweaking, of course. It's a very simple tweak, if so. But yes, I hope that summarizes things a little.
That's pretty good. That being said, I did also ask, so is this a dual overhead cam exclusive? Is it available on single overhead cam with rockers? What's the deal with that?
I think currently it is available on everything that has VVL available as well.
So basically everything but push rods, which I guess makes a lot of sense. I wonder if it makes a lot of sense in direct acting overhead cam, given that most implementations are literally putting a special shaft that adjusts an effective, I don't know if I'd call it the rocker ratio, but
Oh, right, yes. Well, that's certainly missing in that system. That is something that could be tweaked for sure. But let's first see how it plays, and then see how we further need to massage it in order to make it both more realistic and more accurate, and better for gameplay.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so we have our first text question from the field, and that is from Magnus. And that question is, will there be more coupe bodies added? We probably will be adding more coupe bodies, but it's not necessarily a huge priority for us. Our two priorities right now for adding bodies to automation are first to basically root out all the old bodies that are outdated, don't really have a whole lot of morphs, may only have a single variant, or are just otherwise not very functional or even broken in some cases, and replacing them. And the other one is to fill in sort of the gaps that we have in what we already have in terms of body shapes for gears and whatnot. Basically,
especially people mover at this point, yes.
Well, yes, especially now with this whole new MPV demographic, we're going to have to add a whole bunch of new bodies to come along with that. So those are going to be our priorities, at least for the remainder of the Al-Rilma update and also into the Turso update, and probably even beyond that, actually. Body maintenance and repair and replacement is kind of an ongoing thing with automation, so it definitely keeps our contractors busy for quite a while. So we have another text question come in here from Sven Olaf, and that is, would it be possible to add a mode where multiple people can work on a car in multiplayer mode, such as having two people placing fixtures on a car and designing it at the same time?
Oh man, that seems very complex to pull off correctly. That is not something that I can speak to directly either. That would be more of a lead programmer question, but from just the gut feel of it, I would say that is horrendously complex for very little gain, because you're talking about some kind of multiplayer mode where two people are working on the exact same thing, as in a car, and that usually comes with all sorts of troubles and a huge can of worms in terms of bugs. And that is in general also just with version management and so on, which is so commonly done in software development. That how complex those tend to be kind of already hints at how complex this thing would have to be for automation. So I would say with 99.9% certainty that is a feature that will never see the light of day. Even though I would have to agree that it would be cool.
I can just imagine all the streamers getting in on that and having an absolute field day with everybody designing a car all at once. So our next question comes from AltTab8187, and it is a question about leaded fuels. So his question is, what do you think about making the phase out for leaded fuel come very late for Deluha and or Arcana, for example, in 2010? It would give the players a chance to make leaded fuel trim of a car to cater to this niche after all the other countries have phased out leaded fuels.
Yeah, that's an interesting proposition. These two countries, Arcana and Deluha, already do have later cutoff dates, but only by a few years, as you probably are aware of, if you're asking that question. And Deluha is in a position where they kind of switch out their avgas 110 RON almost straight into 100 RON unleaded. Not quite, but I think they're straight up going to 98 or something. So the jump is reasonably small there. But yeah, that is something that we could look into, although I don't think it's too realistic because in terms of what happened in real life, because don't forget that this is not availability of leaded fuels. It is the sales of new cars specifically made for that fuel. Now, you were able to properly buy and drive cars that use that fuel for another 10, 15 years without issue, right? So leaded fuel is there. It's just that you can't sell new cars with it because there's such a long... Yeah, it's a long time to phase it out properly. And that would mean that if we were adopting later dates there, that would imply for the ban, later dates for the ban, that would imply that it's still available in 2020. And it's like, I'm not so sure. That sounds somewhat ridiculous.
Another text question coming in from the field from Redacted. And that question is, what does the rest of 2025 look like, as well as what does 2026 look like? And I'm assuming this is for what do we have planned in the near term and sort of the medium term for automations development.
Right. That's definitely a suitable question for me. So we are still, even though the timeline is stretching, you could say, we're still pretty well following what we laid out 2 years ago. And that is that we have our supercharger update suite, which is 3 updates. It's the Ellisbury update, the Al-Rilma update, and then the Terso update. And what they contain, roughly, is also exactly what we are still doing. Which means that our main focus for Al-Rilma is to get most of the multiplayer fundamentals in. We get the car designer and engine designer mostly feature complete, and especially the simulation to a point where we can be happy for it to not change anymore. That doesn't mean that new content won't be coming in terms of car bodies and fixtures and all that, but that it's mechanically complete. And that is the overarching goal of this update suite, because the 3 updates that are the supercharger update the goal is to make automations designers fully complete, so that we wrap it up as this section of the game is now fully done. Still can get content updates, but we won't change anything in terms of adding new options or any of that stuff. It will be done. And that will allow us to do very important things, which are coming with the Terso update. And that is reintroduce a whole slew of tutorials, because let's be realistic here, onboarding in automation currently sucks ass. I think that's an accurate description. And is basically impossible for new people to get into if they are not like supercar nerds and have 20 hours to just learn on their own how to deal with things in automation. And that needs to change. Onboarding needs to be better, and just clarity of the UI needs to be better. It needs to be more consistent and so on. It doesn't mean we are going to do a big UI revamp or anything, but it just needs to be explained properly. And you can't do that without the designers actually being done. So that is our main goal for the Al-Rilma update. Not so much yet, but especially for the Terso update. And I think you've already seen what's in the Al-Rilma update. But the Terso update is like the wrapping up of this whole engine designer and car designer suite of updates, where everything gets revamped and polished up.
And just to add to that, the other thing is that until we actually get the automation car and engine designers featured complete, we really can't do a whole lot in terms of localizations either. So until that time, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for us to go and translate the entire game into other languages, only to have it become completely obsolete with the next version that comes out.
Yep, very good point.
Our next question comes from Jen, and that is, will Y-pipe exhausts get added on engines with single headers and or turbos? As of currently, right now, that is something that we are starting to lay the groundwork to do in terms of investigation and in terms of also the technical side of actually having branching exhausts from essentially from a single exhaust, so you can have dual outlets, and specifically for BeamNG, basically 2 functional outlets for the exhaust.
Yep, that's something that's being worked on actively.
I don't know what timeline is for bringing that into automation yet, but it is something that we are working on, and hopefully we should actually have that in not necessarily patch 7, but maybe the following patch, depending on how complicated it looks, Rob.
Yeah, I think that's realistic. Jay has been working on this and has made good progress from what I could tell. So it is likely to appear latest with the beta version, if it's successful. Like there could be issues popping up which say that basically no, we have to scrap it. But if it works out, then beta version would probably have the Y exhaust.
Yeah, it's something that has been much requested for a long time from a lot of our players, and we're finally happy to be able to deliver on that. So for our next question, it comes from Bollywood Braxton, another text question, and that is, what does the timeline for the brand museum and campaign look like?
For the museum? The car museum?
I'm assuming so. He says brand museum, so I think he probably means a car museum.
Right, okay. So that is mostly a fluff feature, which is a great to have, makes the game feel better, but doesn't really play better. And that means it's not a high priority at the moment. We're trying to focus mostly on things that either are pretty quick or have significant impact in terms of time invested on our end towards playability and or enjoyability of the campaign. I would place the museum a little further down, even though I see the immersion factor of it. And having the museum featured in a better light, because currently it definitely is not. It doesn't feel like a museum. It just is a kind of a backlog of cars at the moment, which you can select and then export and whatnot. That is certainly something that we do want to revamp, but it is something that is going to come after Terza, probably in the Grand Campaign, like the start of the Grand Campaign stuff.
Next question is, are there any plans to ever update going past 2020 cars? And I can answer that and say, no, there is not. 2020 is a nice, solid cutoff. It makes development nice and easy, especially when you consider that there's just been an absolute explosion of very complicated and also very proprietary technology in the automotive industry. It makes it very difficult to model that if there isn't really a whole lot of information and a lot of technical papers on that. And it also means that there is less onus for us to consider hybridization and electrical propulsion, which is an extremely complicated, and electric motors and batteries are a lot more complicated than anybody really thinks they are to simulate. And to get into that, you practically need to have like a master's or PhD in electrical engineering or chemistry or all of the above. So that saves us a massive, massive headache to not have to include that into automation.
So at some point, when we have reached 2040 and are still developing automation 1 that is, we can say, just rename the game to Automation, the golden age of automotive engineering tycoon or something. I think that's what we were aiming for in the first place.
Next question is from Text to Sell. It's from Crummy, and that is, will we get an Outlook video for 2025? And I guess I'll add in 2026.
I think that might be in the cards for sure, especially once I think the where it would make the most sense is once we have released the public version of Al-Rilma. That would be the spot, like a week or 2 after that, to talk about what's coming up next in the Terza update, mostly. Because that is still going to be a massive update with lots of good stuff that really polishes up automation. So certainly something that I'm going to do. And the time for it is after the public release of it, after beta, and then that going into public.
Another text question from Sarah, and that is, has there been any work done on balancing the weight of vehicles? I found that even the heavy ladder frames that have been added now, that earlier 4x4s tend to still be quite light.
Well, yes, you can see from the weights of convertible cars that we do have, that we did do some work on weight in general, but we don't have anything laid out at the moment for general car weight. We know there are issues with it still, and it is a little difficult to pinpoint because for real cars you don't really get the data on which part, as we define it, is weighing a certain amount. Like, how much does the chassis weigh? What is part of the chassis? What is part of the body? And how much do they weigh compared to all the other components and auxiliaries and so on? So it's something that we need to look into for sure, but it is at the moment not a high priority. That's definitely something that we do want to do in tuning. It does require a lot of data to get right, and it is something that we are currently preparing for in the close testing by having our beta testers build accurate replicas of cars and then see if they are fitting in terms of weight and so on. And if they don't, like, what settings did they choose? Is it realistic? Should it be tweaked in one direction or another? Are there trends that are visible and so on? So that needs to be figured out. But there are no concrete plans of investigating that yet, but it's something on our mind.
Next one comes up from Bernie, another text question. And this one, this is actually specifically for me. And that is there a possibility of some theme challenges from 3 years ago? I'm assuming referring to the official design challenge we ran at the end of 2022. For example, 1955 to 1975 family cars, 1955 to 1970 GT cars. Will we be revisiting them? It's definitely a possibility. We don't necessarily want to do repeats of exactly what we did before, just because that's a little bit boring and a little bit repetitive, and people don't really like that. They always like something that's new and exciting and different to work on. But what might be kind of fun is maybe just running some of our monthly/quarterly design challenges here on the Discord. Maybe doing a sequel to one of them. Like, say, for example, we did a 1980 to 1995 JDM car category. Maybe we could run one that is earlier than that or one that is later than that. So thing is, I've already got lots and lots of ideas as it is for community challenges. So they might not necessarily come immediately, but it's definitely something I might think about doing. Next question is from Real Tim X Time, and that is it possible to add engines with just 1 or 2 cylinders? First of all, we do answer that in the automation FAQ, but single cylinder engines are probably never going to come to automation, just because our art doesn't really necessarily allow for single cylinder engines because it is modular. And the other thing is we don't have sounds for single cylinder engines, and that is kind of a challenge, because if we were to add an engine outside of what we have engine sounds for, we basically would have to redo all of our engine sounds from top to bottom, and that is a huge task. I've got another question here from Magnus, and that is, will there ever be K cars in automation and K truck bodies?
Well, you can already build them if you wanted to, but it is not a demographic at the moment. The closest that you get to it is city cars, which do favor very small bodies. And in terms of regulation, I think they are too specific for their market size. Like, if we were simulating, if it was automation, the Japanese automotive tycoon game, then yeah, sure. That would have to be a demographic, and the various regulations would have to be simulated in that way. But I don't think they are playing too much of a role in the automotive industry in general. And they are quite specific. And we don't want to get like this is dangerous. Dangerous in air quotes, you see, because if we add something like this, then that opens the door to all other regulations and limitations as well. For instance, for different displacement classes and whatnot for utility vehicles, and having different designations for what car is what, so that you do get different behaviors for what you can do and what safety regulations are saying. And you see, all that stuff we do want to get out of the way and not consider, because it is micromanaging as hell if you're trying to make a car company, because you need to be aware of all the regulation in order to know where you fit in. And I don't think that necessarily is fun, which is also why we are doing the displacement taxes in such a generic way without any kind of exemptions and whatnot. We're trying to simplify things that exist in the automotive industry to something that is playable and gives us fun gameplay and interesting incentives without overdoing it such that it becomes a chore. So I think key cars are interesting. Yeah, a very special type of car and demographic to sell to. But I think we are making a car tycoon game and not necessarily almost a car tycoon game.
We now have a voice question from Zenturi.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you guys?
Well, pretty good.
Oh.
Seems like it. We are still alive. So go ahead.
That's always a good sign. Yeah, so as someone who primarily does campaign stuff, right? A lot has changed with this update. So car designer, engine design, I mean, pretty much all of it's been overhauled now. The way you even make cars has been completely changed. With the campaign now also getting a UI overhaul, which I've had a look at just on the video, and I'm loving what I'm seeing. There's a lot of changes made. You can sell factories now and all that kind of stuff. But I did ask this as a text question, but I thought I'd just ask it as a voice question. How exactly is it going to, like, how much is changing? Because it seems like everything is, which, yeah, I'm looking forward to trying out, but there's also a big learning curve once again.
I would say it's not as much as it looks like. There are a few features which are indeed new, but they are more adding to existing things, like consolidation loans, for instance, are just a way to get out of the hellhole of bankruptcy loans a bit better, right?
I know that
is
all too well.
That is not something that you always encounter. It is something that you encounter at an extreme of the situations. While that is also, just to give the context there, consolidation loans now also work better that you actually can sell stuff, like your factories, to get some more money, so that you get better credit rating to then consolidate, and then you might be doing a little better. I would say the change overall is significant, but not so that you won't feel it's not familiar anymore. It is, if you know the campaign and you have played a few times, a few runs maybe, and not successful, mind you, it doesn't have to be, but you will feel at home pretty quickly again. The main flow is mostly the same still, and the new features aren't as complex. Aren't so complex that you will feel lost. I don't think so.
No, that's good to hear, because I mean, just seeing the way that the main UI is now changed, how everything's now really flowy and everything. I'm loving what I'm seeing. Just the addition of being able to sell the factories and consolidation loans. I think I said it correctly.
Yep.
Just all of it adding up together sounds really, really good, and I'm very convinced that it is a very, very good thing. But yeah, with the whole car designer changing and everything, I was a bit skeptical that there was going to be a lot of changes made that would change the entire flow of the campaign, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I don't
But,
think
yeah.
the actual flow won't change much at all.
No, that's
Because
good, yeah.
you're still in the same loop designing the car, setting up marketing and so on. That doesn't change. Let me pull up the quick to-do listy thing, which has right. So just to go through the some of the main points. So new smaller factories that just adds more flavor. Like,
Yeah,
and
of
gives
course,
you
yeah.
harder starts. One thing that we are going to change is the balance of the difficulty multipliers. I don't even like it. It is still possible to do a 100x, but I'm not sure if you can actually succeed at it. That would be definitely a new challenge. So insane difficulty now sits at roughly 4x. The default setting. So that is going
That's a
to
change.
yeah, that's quite a change in terms of score, which is kind of irrelevant anyway. It's like that doesn't make it harder. But I mean, the new regulation stuff will make it more customizable because you can now
with the safety stuff as well.
yeah, safety, emissions, and displacement taxes are
No,
now
I like that, yeah.
customizable in terms of how you want to have your game feel. So I think it is much more adaptable to what you want to do in general.
No,
that
I like
also
that.
is about the prototyping of cars now being possible and engine prototyping being more obvious how to do it. But overall, I think
No, it all just sounds,
the biggest change that we haven't put in yet, that won't be in patch number 7, I hope we still get to it, would be to make all AI companies actually use factories to calculate their pricing.
Oh.
So that would be a change that isn't visible to the player directly, but it would change a lot in terms of gameplay.
Yeah,
because currently they're just using fudge factors for their car prices, depending on which demographic they're selling to, which isn't always accurate or realistic compared to their sales numbers and whatnot. But that is an overall thing where we want to trend towards making competitors much more visible, because that is what is going to do the storytelling in your game. To have that direct comparison, to compete against something that feels less like a spreadsheet and more like a real entity.
Would we then be able to see these companies? Like physically see them?
You can already, but they are called like Delure Family Large.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Those are the companies. So there are actual companies which have a lineup of cars they're selling, and they are selling in the global market against all the others. And they do have a main headquarters region and everything. So they are proper AI companies, and they use cars that are designed the exact same way as you can do yourself with the AI generation. I think, how many cars do we have there? Like, was it something on the order of 6,000-7,000 cars that are generated, which the AI competitors pick from?
That's a lot of cars.
Yeah, that's a lot of generated cars, yes. And those cars will then be put into actual factories to make it more realistic from there.
Okay.
But
that's
a big change.
Yes, well,
but one that is also under the hood. So overall,
it's not something
I think
you'll directly
meaningful
see.
change, but not unfamiliar.
Yeah, it's not something you'll directly see, but it's something you'll definitely feel.
Yep.
I like that. No, I do. I'm really enjoying this whole push towards the whole realism aspect of running a car company.
Okay, we have another voice question from iCrafterChips.
I've heard that we could limit in what markets we sell our cars, since at the time we can only limit them by using safety. So the only way to kind of limit your cars is putting in no safety, and that's only practical if you want to make an Arcana family car with no emissions. But now that we have engine taxes, this could be a lot more handy. For example, if you want to make an unlimited version of a car for the Lua, but keep it sensible for other markets so they can actually get it.
Yes, and that is something that we definitely want to do. We already have laid the in the background the groundworks for this by making inventory of cars region/country specific. So if you are building a car in Slovenia, you have its inventory in Slovenia, and then you're paying to get it exported to other places. And that is part of the system where selling to different regions comes into play. It is, as you point out, very much needed as a feature. It is not going to come with patch 7, but I would hope that we maybe are able to cram it into Al-Rilma somehow, because it is so important with all the new regulation stuff that you actually can sell to specific regions if you wanted to, and or at least limit which regions you don't want to sell to by just for each trim having some kind of toggle for each country flag there is, or whatever system that it uses. Something simple probably first. But yes, they're very important and definitely something that we want to get in. It's not in patch 7 yet.
Yeah, that's what I would have thought, something simple. And speaking about regulations, is there any chance to have a tax bracket that's under 1x? I know someone asked for K cars, and they would be complicated with all the size dimension and with height, so on, even horsepower. But having a lower tax bracket could be handy and could make making interesting cheap cars even more interesting.
Well, I would say that is something that is a no, but it is a no because that is covered by something else already. Displacement taxes were mostly linked to emissions regulation. That is why they existed. It's another way of saying you are not supposed to be guzzling fuel, even though that is not necessarily true, of course. But the emissions side already has tax benefits. So just make the smallest engine class and then make it good emissions and you're getting paid. So that's your tax exemption there. That is going quite a bit lower. And the best part is, it's not the customer that is paid, it's you that is being paid.
Thanks for the answer. And just a small, actually, I don't know if it's small, but is more flavor being added to the game? For example, like you've showed with the backgrounds. Right now, they don't do much, but this does signal to me that you've got a bit more lore coming in, so to say.
Yes, flavor is something that we need to add a lot of in the long term. And like I hinted at before, I think most of the flavor is going to come from making a competition more visible. And we do have some thoughts around that, like, for instance, actually designed competitors, where players, people as in people who are playing automation and designing nice cars, can submit their designs. And we have some kind of process which allows us to put those designs into a database for designs to be picked at random by the companies. And that would mean that the competitor cars, which already are showing up when you hover over them in the sales breakdown, that they actually have a look to them. And flavor would come from once that is more fleshed out, the competitor side. The competitors would, if it is a main competitor of yours who's trying to be active in the same niches, maybe in the same region, and so on, that those are popping up in your newsfeed, like so and so company has released their new trim, blah blah blah, and it is it's highly desirable at a rating of 125 or whatever, right, compared to yours, so that you are much more aware of what's going on. And I think that adds a lot of flavor beyond just being nicer to look at. And yeah, I think that's the main trajectory that we're going. But just in general making the flow nicer and having a bit more immersion things in the campaign will help a lot.
Yeah, thanks. You've really thought of everything, because I was about to ask about a newsfeed, and you've answered probably what I would have asked, because that's how I would have also thought about the newsfeed. Yeah, thanks again for all the answers, and I'll be eager to send in my cars once the database sessions are open.
Yeah, have fun designing.
Yeah, have a good night.
I would like to add one thing that is a little unrelated, but also shows that we are thinking of the immersion aspect of the campaign, which also connects at the same time to your competitors, and that is maybe for Terzo, but definitely after that, that we have various stats for cars that are tracked by which car is the best in the world at that point. And if you hold these records at the moment, your company gains prestige for that duration of time where you hold those records. So it becomes a direct connection to your competitors again, because there might be a news item like so-and-so has released this car and it beats your 0 to 100 time by 0.1 seconds, you have been dethroned. And like this, you're now losing one prestige or company brand prestige because of that. So that is something that I think will make the world feel a lot more lived in and lively, because competitors are more visible. It feels more like you're interacting with the world instead of just being in your little corner and doing your stuff and you get money for it. So yeah, there are many avenues we can take to get more immersion into the campaign, and I think many of those avenues need to be walked in order to make the campaign actually fully enjoyable by a wider player audience that is already enjoying Sandbox.
So we're going to answer a text question here, and then we'll get to our next voice question. And the text question here is from AltTab8187 once again. And that is, would it be possible to have the ability to add in certain things that are not possible in automation, but do have provisions in BeamNG and exported cars? Stuff like dogleg gearboxes, changing fuel tank sizes, and whatnot. I'm assuming
it
this
is possible, but it is not a high priority because it's not directly affecting automation, and B, it would have to live within the export menus and not within automation itself. So it is definitely something that if there is a lot of demand for it, it's something that we over time can add. But I'm not talking specifics here, like what you exactly mentioned, but in general, those are things that can be added, but are of lower priority because they are not directly affecting gameplay in automation.
I think I'd just add to that as well, is that we'd have to be very picky and very choosy about what we do add in if we do decide to go down that route, because I can imagine it would get extremely complicated very quickly. Okay, on to our next voice question, and that is from SlimJim86.
So we've got a lot of changes coming with respect to financial management, which I find very interesting, but that brought up another kind of idea that I had about additional forms of raising capital, whether that be through things like stock, bond, private equity, things like that. Has the team given any thought to that?
Definitely yes, for the longer term. That's one of the first things in 2012 or so that were discussed. Back then, like, how would we want to do that? Would there be a stock market? Would there be you trying to basically sell out completely at the start and then having to work your way back by buying back your stock and actually making it your own company in the long run, depending on how you set things up or how greedy your banksters are that you're interacting with. So yes, there has been some thought put into this, but it has been a while ago, and because it is a feature that would be grand campaign and not light campaign, I would say that that needs to be properly worked up once we are approaching those. But I think it is pretty likely that this is going to be a yes in general, that we will have some forms of capital management or setup at the start. Because at the moment, the only thing that you really have is factories and plots as your capital, plus, of course, cash at the start, which is nice, but it doesn't let you really set up some kind of shares or whatnot with investors and so on. So there are definitely things that would be interesting, and stock market is something that is always exciting in these games. Would be fun to do. To actually buy up other companies that way, hostile takeovers. But that is definitely something for a grand campaign. So I'm not spending much of my time thinking about that at the moment, but will do so more in the future.
So this text question comes from General Idiocy 27, and that is, I'm not sure if this has been asked, but will we ever get the chance to export PBR textures to BeamNG drive cars?
That's their material system, is it?
That's
Yeah.
correct. That's BeamNG's material system. I will say this is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse and a little bit outside of Rob's wheelhouse too.
Very outside of my wheelhouse. I have no clue. Exporter things are not my thing. Sorry. That is likely a maybe. I don't know. Depends on how technically viable it is for the most part. And I can't really say what has been tried on that yet. So it seems like something that we would try to either work around or try to implement. But yeah, I can't say much to it.
We do have the one mod that has PBR Plus support in it, which is essentially the same thing. And it sort of works sometimes and sort of doesn't. My guess is there's probably a lot of things we'd have to do, not just in the exporter coding, but also in automation itself that we'd have to get set up before that even works reliably and properly. And again, as what Rob said, is I can't even begin to speak to how difficult that would be. I mean, it might be something that's very simple, or it might be an absolute monumental task that just keeps snowballing and becomes very, very difficult to manage. So it's something that probably is worth looking into, to be honest, but I can't really say anything much more than that. Get to our next voice question here, which is from Monster Energy Zero Ultra.
On the last video with the new ignition, or with the new timing and fuel system, you mentioned how it's kind of overriding sort of an older fudge factor based system. And I was just kind of curious if there's anywhere else in automation you were kind of eyeballing that you kind of weren't happy with the fudge factor state of it and wanted to maybe look at it again.
Those. Yeah, let me think. There is nothing that comes to mind right now because there's nothing in particular that I'm working on trying to defudge at the moment. I think the biggest places where that was the case have been cleaned up quite a bit and done in a little bit more simulation style than before, instead of parameterizations. So I wouldn't be able to say anything in particular at the moment. Something that always is kind of on our mind is anything to do with cam profiles, because they have so many
Variations, yeah.
different effects, especially with overlap in connection to turbocharging or forced induction in general. And that's such a rat's nest where you can go as in detail as you like. But I think
I can see how it makes the onboarding gap, like you talked about earlier, even bigger, the more
it
complicated
would,
it gets.
it sure would. But in many cases, the fudging is just as obtuse as or weird as the real thing is. So I don't think that's an excuse necessarily from our end that we could use.
Oh yeah, no, it was kind of a basic question, but I was just curious if there was anything else on your mind. But that's all I had to
Yeah.
ask.
The like one thing, the main thing that still needs to change, that I will have to work on is the volumetric efficiencies of superchargers,
Mhm.
which are giving us wrong behavior. I know that's not exactly what you're asking there. It wasn't a fudge factor to start with. It was just wrong to
Mhm.
start with. So, but the
Points are trying though.
yeah, exactly. Considering that it is a simple-ish implementation, it does work pretty well, but it does give wrong results in some instances. So I think that's
Awesome.
the last big one that we have for the engine simulation necessarily. So yeah,
That's good
I'm
to hear,
not
yeah.
sure if I have anything on my map for defudging at the moment.
Awesome. I guess that's probably good news then, right?
Well, until I run into something where I say like,
Yeah.
that is
Forgot about that,
probably
yeah.
not right.
So another text question here before we get to our next voice question, and this question comes from Kokowita, and it's kind of a question that a lot of, especially our newer and less experienced players in automation ask, and that is, to what extent do the engine simulations model real-world performance and reliability? If I create a real-world engine specs and configuration in-game, can I expect outputs like horsepower, torque, fuel consumption, and durability to closely match real-life results?
Yeah, that's a good one. If you are an experienced automation player, then absolutely. Most experienced automation players will, for let's call it 90% of engines, especially naturally aspirated ones, get to within like 1 or 2% of the real engine's performance. In terms of reliability, that's depends on how you measure it, really. The mean time between failures stuff is more of a guide and a relative comparison than it is a real life stat. As are various stats like smoothness. How do you measure smoothness and things like that, right? But in terms of performance, you can get really damn close with naturally aspirated engines, slightly less close with turbocharged engines, and we are still working very much on other forced induction combinations to get them accurate. And any beta tester can attest to us having to rerun various engine checking tests every time we do changes to the simulation so that we know that we are still somewhat accurate. And many of you are quite sensitive about performance lacking and or being too much. Get, of course, just like any good ARPG player, get your pitchforks out when 3% of power is missing, and say nothing if you have 5% too much. But yeah, that is something in general that automation is pretty good at, considering that it is not a simulation per se. But the interesting part about it is that the accuracy mostly comes from us using 500 billion fudge factors that you all can control. So you have the illusion of everything being super accurate because you can just fudge it to be accurate. So, and the tendencies that these various design parameters and sliders have are all believable in their scope. And if they're not, then that is definitely something that we need to tweak and change. But yes, so in general, automation recreations can be extremely accurate to the point where automotive industry people would say, like, this is really good. And yeah, I think that answers the question.
So we have another voice question here, and that is from Asta Hovel.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. I just want to say thanks for making the update to the campaign. It's one of my favorite features in the game, so very much looking forward to play it. I have a couple of questions. First one being, the main thing I remember last time I played campaign was that I'm having a good time, but sometimes I struggle to visualize what's happening in terms of exporting to different countries. I tried making factories in the different countries to try to lower taxes or lower fees, but I never felt like I fully understood the system. So my first question is there any plans to try to improve the visualization of how export works?
Yes, so longer term there is definitely not for like you were along for the discussion we just had before this with the limiting of exports to different regions depending on your trim, right? That by itself needs to have a more visualized UI. Think of it as you having your HQ and the world map, let's call it the world map, and you see when you select a car, you see arrows and how the production runs to each country. That is a longer term plan to have that in, so that you can visualize where you're building things and where those things are going that you're building. That is not going to be part of the Al-Rilma update, for sure, and it's more a grand campaign thing, but we do see that that is absolutely necessary to make the world feel real and to help the player visualize what is going on, because your concern there is 100% valid. The only way you can currently tell is the market breakdown, where you can see which regions you are selling to and how many cars and what trim goes to where, in what demographic, and so on. So all the data is there. The visualization is, let's call it basic at the moment.
Yeah, that was a good answer. Thank you. My second question, real quick. Are there any thoughts in the future of introducing any kind of multiplayer, perhaps a system where players agree to make a car every 5 years? Is there anything like that in the plans, or are there other priorities in terms of developing campaign?
So that is something that we did say we wanted to do right from the start, like 2011 or 2012. That has always been on the list of features that we were more or less promising. But having thought it through over the years, and a lot of thought has gone into this, we don't see a good solution for the time aspect of it. Because if you are making it such that a game can be played within, say, 4 hours, which would be a long gaming session, but a viable one, right? That would mean that you have an insanely fast month tick. And it would mean that, like, say you're designing a lineup. How long does that usually take you? Let's say if you're a good automation player and you know what you're doing, designing one model with several trims and setting up the factories and setting up marketing and doing all that maybe takes you 20 minutes. Like, calculate how many years that is in those 4 hours, right? It's a lot. It's probably around those... well, 4 hours, that would be, 12, right? So 20 minutes is 1/3 of an hour, or so you would have 3 times that in an hour, so times 4 that, so you're 12. You would be able to design 12 cars within the full length of the game. And that is 4 hours. So that seems a little rushed, and it would be very stressful.
Yeah, I 100%
if you go to
agree.
Let me paint the other extreme picture. If you make it so that everyone can play along, games would take forever. That would probably still be fun. Let's say you make 1 day in real life is 1 year in game. I think that could work. It would be more a game mode of playing by mail, so to say, where each player, independent of each other, they make their choices for the year, and then it goes off to the calculations, and 1 year calculates after that. So everyone designs everything in January or makes decisions for January, and then just calculates, right? And then next day you come back. If you want to, you can also skip a few days. That's just a few years down the line, right? It doesn't really matter that much. But that is 74 days a game takes. That's a lot, right? That's so much that most people become disengaged unless you're super hardcore. And if you then have a game where, let's say, 16 people are playing and towards the end there are only 4 left, it's also kind of meh. It's not accumulating in an epic ending. It's like a real like drag towards the end. So the main issue with making campaign multiplayer work, and we're very open to hearing solutions, is that we don't see how to solve the time aspect of it properly to make it fun.
I honestly think the only real solution you guys have is maybe look at this similar to where you look at like turn-based strategy, where 1 year is 1 turn. Of course, the catch is that if you have one guy wanting to make a car in 94 and the next guy, no, actually I want to make one in 96, then you have to wait and take turns. That sucks, of course.
Yeah, that doesn't work because of that reason.
Yeah. But I don't know. I think a casual, when you play with 3 other friends, where it takes whatever time it takes, I think that would be cool. But I do appreciate the in-depth answer to the question. Thank you so much.
And let me add to that too. If you're playing in such a mode where you have a reasonable amount of granularity, and with reasonable I mean far less than you have at the moment, you are going to bankrupt your company within an instant, because the way most people I've seen play, and I'm considering myself to be one of those people, is that you do shit, and then you notice that that shit was actually shit, and you have to correct course a little bit, mostly. It's like, oh, that was not the best decision. Let me lower that R&D because that was insanely costly, and I can't afford that. If you have a granularity which allows you to play those longer multiplayer games in a reasonable amount of time, let's say, for instance, 1 turn is either 1 year or 2 years or maybe even 5 years, where everyone does his design for 1 year or for 1 turn, and then that car is being sold for 5 years. I think so many people would go bankrupt in an instant because they can't do the fine-tuning that you always do in campaign to course correct.
Oh, that is a good point. Yeah.
So that makes the game insanely hard. And yeah, I don't know if it would play well.
We're going to do a couple text questions, and then we'll get to our next voice question here. The first text question is from Sam, and that is, would there be a way to make computers that are underpowered or older be able to run slightly better for photo mode or less detailed animations?
Well, that's in general an Unreal 4 engine optimization thing. There is still a lot of performance that can be gained, but it's something that we always do a little bit of here and there, for sure, especially now with campaign, for instance, with the turn system changing. It's just an example. It's not about photo mode, but it's an example of performance optimizations. We did go through and did do profiling for what does take so long. And there were several instances which could just be cut out because they were double and triple calling something that didn't need to be called. Stuff like this is going to be optimized away, and that makes things run better on older systems naturally, as well as it makes it run better on modern systems too. But being on Unreal Engine 4, what is it, 428 or 427? 427 it is. We are kind of locked into what that engine does, because we're not going to reprogram the engine just to make photo mode a little bit more performant on potatoes, right? And potatoes are going to rot eventually. You have to buy a new one. And with automation taking so long to develop, that's a problem that naturally solves itself. And that is probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but it's, I think, the most realistic approach there. So yes, we are always trying to find little things that we can do to improve stuff, especially in photo scenes as well. That's an artist and engine thing, but it's not a main focus.
I think I'd also like to add to that, something that I've come to learn is that a lot of the things you think are causing performance issues often are not. And a lot of the stuff that isn't is actually what's causing the performance issues in terms of game development, as we've no doubt found countless times. Wouldn't you say, Rob?
Oh, yes.
Okay, we're going to get another text question in here, and then we're going to invite the same person up for a voice question, so a bit of a 1-2 punch here. And that is from Texas Slav. So the question that he has from text is there an understanding of what all still needs to be added to the car and trim designer, not the engine designer specifically, or changed in it before Terso was done? For example, suspension options in art and chassis options in art.
We do have, let me think. There are a few things that we wanted to look into for chassis. Part of which has been changed already with the addition of the heavy-duty ladder frames and partial monocoque being a more general option now. I think we have opened up for this update some of the engine configurations that are available on different chassis types. So that is something that has been done, but in terms of additions that are needed for Terso, I'm not so sure about that. I'm sure that once we are going through that, like currently we are in mindset. Let's talk general mindset where we are at the moment and where we will be at the start of Terso. Right now we need to make the stuff that we have added work and work well, and then just polish things up. Once we approach Terso, that completely changes to, this is the last update. What we have at the end of this is going to be the case basically forever, unless there is a really good argument for us changing something specific. But we're definitely not going to add anything larger. So what that means is that at that point, we're going to have a big rethinking, reconsideration of what could be added, what is viable to be added or changed, and if we want to do that or not, if it's good for gameplay or not. I think with the engine and car designer in general, we are in a pretty good place with the Al-Rilma update, and that was the overarching goal of the update, to get most of the engine and car designer basically feature complete, and then build everything with Terso on top of that. But if there are still things missing, then yes, that would be the place to reconsider adding those in for the Terso update.
So what you're saying is that there will be kind of a reckoning, in a sense, which hasn't yet happened.
Yes. At the moment, like I said, this is basically a case of we have added quite a bit now with the engine and car designer, for the engine and car designer. Let's see how that plays out. If there are still holes in gameplay for design options and so on that need to be filled, and are there any viable and reasonable requests from the community or things that should be in that we can put in without getting nosebleed from implementation. And that is something that happens at the start of Terso, to really wrap things up with the design of the design choices that are available in the designers before we sign them off as, in air quotes, done.
So just to add to that, something that Rob didn't quite answer, but in terms of the visual art especially for the car designer, that has largely been untouched for quite a while. Unlike the engine designer, where we've spent, certainly in this last update, a considerable amount of time updating the art. And we're actually getting into a fairly good spot with that, I'd say. Wouldn't you agree, Rob?
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like but there has been quite a bit of work done on the chassis itself recently by Hard Rooster. That has been updated, but not nearly as much work as has been done on the various engine art, like the engine blocks, the heads, and the headers are now being revamped as well. So lots of nice, and the fuel systems, not to mention. That is something that's that also was done. So lots of updates there in terms of visual art. And I think suspensions will be up at some point as well to get a little bit of a revision. And maybe, I think we've already done diffs. But maybe gearboxes are next or something. I don't know. But there will be visual updates. That's something that I didn't understand the question as at first. Sorry about that. But yes, that is definitely going to happen during the continuation of Al-Rilma as well as Terzo, as much as we can do within a time frame. And those are things that are not necessarily considered done because they don't require any change on our end in terms of implementations. It's just like you change the model, you sign it off, and it's better. There's no feasibility barrier there beyond time the artist spends. And if they don't have anything better to work on, then that is a win, right? That's something that we definitely can do and will do.
That's actually something I was going to half ask and half suggest, that because unlike feature and balance completeness, models aren't necessarily crucial to be done in time for your tutorial overhaul. So
Exactly.
just like you might be spending some of the freed up time for the model people on the feature small and large engine packages after quote unquote release, quote unquote feature completeness, you could do the same for some of the chassis and suspension models. For example, if we ever want semi-trailing arm not to look like a low poly bar with a massive hole where the bearing should be, that could be done deep into the campaign development process, because the model people will have less to do there and then.
Yeah, absolutely. That is certainly something that we do want to do. In general,
And then-
just improve the art as much as possible, because it's exactly as you say. It's completely independent from other development.
Now, on the question I actually wanted to ask as my dedicated voice question, this is something I thought of while we were talking about fudging, about cam profiles and stuff like that.
Yep.
So first of all, I'd like to say that I have gotten to the point where I can fudge a supercharged engine very closely to actual specifications. I've had a very productive time getting a replica of the LT 1, 4, and 5 engines, for example, in line with proper pulley ratios and the like.
Nice.
One thing I've noticed is that because of how little cam currently supercharged engines require, which of course is subject to more playtesting and balancing, but still, they end up cleaning up emissions-wise massively. So what I found is the LT5 and 4 could match or exceed their, which those are the Z06 and ZR1 engines for the Corvette C7. They were significantly more viable in terms of emissions than naturally aspirated LT1 and LT2. And
Okay.
So you could get,
Because you're running low compression as well at the same time, right?
well, it was low-ish. It was still 10-1 on these, so it's
okay.
reasonable. Superchargers don't require as much of a compression drop because the
Oh, of course.
actual pressurization is not as high either. But what I noticed is you get a very sporty torque curve on a pushrod supercharged engine with a cam. So, for example, for the LT4, I believe I was running about 630 foot-pounds. I don't know how you can convert Newton meters, but generally it's pretty sporty if you have a significantly lower imperial torque figure than a power figure. And it was 630, 655 with 7 cam profile. Now,
Right.
of course,
Let me update you on that situation, because I think that will address the general complex of what you're talking about. So one thing that I found out with the testing of the current supercharger implementation is that the current superchargers that are implemented very well simulate the modern Eaton TVR
TVS.
series. TVS series, yeah, exactly.
High
And
twisters.
yes, and that is fine and dandy, but they do the model that I've built there does not, in fact, simulate anything but those.
Like the Toyota 1200 thing, right?
So what you are going to see is that there will be a new supercharger type that we add, as in the geometry, which is the non-modern version of roots.
So the
So
671.
the roots that are not basically a screw. So, and that will mean that which comes now back to the point of cam profile, what you're observing there. The issue is, in general, that the current implementation of superchargers has a rising volumetric efficiency curve.
Correct.
As you are going towards higher RPM, they continue to increase in volumetric efficiency. And that is realistic for these very modern root superchargers. It's accurately modeled. The problem is that is not at all the case for old root superchargers. They are very much flattening out or even going down slightly in terms of volumetric efficiency towards higher RPM. What that means is that your boost response curve that you get is much more in line with what you get in terms of volumetric efficiency from your engine. And what that means is that if they are more aligned in terms of how they progress, is that you get more flat boost overall. Right now, what you will observe is that your boost rises up and then just continues climbing on a nice little curve, just ever so slightly, and then towards the end, as you go over peak power, you just, or even peak torque for that matter, you start to increase and then shoot up, right, in terms of boost. And that's because...
That's you filling in the volumetric efficiency of the engine, which drops towards the top.
Yes, exactly. And that is realistic to an extent. Like, it's probably a little too strong there at the moment, but it's realistic. But that comes from the model of the TVS superchargers, Eaton ones. And with the older stuff, they have a more rapid increase in volumetric efficiency at the start and then flatten out and even drop towards higher RPM, which will make it such that that your cam profiles will be much more realistic in terms of giving you the correct results. So you can run a higher cam profile, and that will give you a mostly flat response. Instead of think of that if you can imagine what would happen if you were combining that with a too high cam profile or too low cam profile. If you combine it with too low cam profile, you would have no boost at the start, because your engine is super efficient, wants to have a lot of air, but the supercharger can't provide it. If you're running too high a cam profile, especially without VVT and stuff, then what happens is that your engine can't take in anything because your volumetric efficiency of the engine is garbage, but your supercharger already is pumping a lot, so you would get a massive spike in boost at early RPM. And there's a point of balance that is missing there because we don't have that modeled yet. That will be added as an old style root supercharger, as a new option for you to take as a geometry. And I think that will solve a lot of issues that we currently have with trying to cram Eaton TV S-style superchargers into roots in general. So I think that gives you a little bit of big picture situation there.
That's a good outlook. That being said, the setup that I was trying to model in the LT4 does exclusively use, as far as I know, Eaton TVSs.
Right, okay.
So first of all, before I continue, because this kind of gave me an idea, could you not just alter specifically the Roots superchargers tuning slider to be much more impactful in order to achieve a similar effect? basically, instead of just tuning being, altering the length to width and maybe the twist ratio of the supercharger, it would drastically change twist basically from 0 to the 170 plus degrees we have now, and maybe kind of perform a blendedized, fluidized version of increasing the amount of lobes. Just make that
Right.
slider very powerful in order to achieve a similar effect.
I think the slider is. I see what I understand the question. I think that's that would be a valid approach because in general a valid approach because the low end of the tune spectrum does not quite go hard enough in order to encompass the old style root superchargers. So I see what you're saying, but I think it would be much better to have that separated in terms of modeling, because everything that you just mentioned in terms of lobes and twist and the ratios, that is all fudged in terms of I look at the resulting map and I try to model it based off of that slider, so that slider encompasses all those options.
Well, yeah, you
If
can't
you
really
suddenly
you can't really
go
run a fluid dynamics simulation every time you
No.
move the slider.
No, exactly. So basically, what you're suggesting correctly, without being in depth in the implementation, is that you have a super complex system as is, which just barely works. Let's call it that, or well, mostly works at this point. And then you say that, by the way, let's expand it by about 100%. It's like, that doesn't quite work. So it is the better approach to make the system instead cut out the attempt to model the old stuff, the failed attempt to model the old stuff, and make it exclusively and better tuned towards the newer stuff, and then add an option which is exclusively tuned towards the old stuff, which has to be remodeled separately, which limits the design space and makes it more attainable to have everything that is old in that model. I think it would take overall more time and effort and be much more prone to error if the existing system was expanded to be that wide to encompass it all. Because the current progressions that are implemented for the compressor maps and volumetric efficiency curves, those are quite complex as is, and I want to touch them as little as possible. Making a new set of them with new tuning parameters and stuff, that is probably fine. I would estimate about a month to 2 months of my time to get that done. But expanding the system, that sounds a little too scary at this point.
Now, what I actually wanted to ask, and the reason I mentioned that I simulated an LT1, LT5, and LT4, is that I used the same block quality and heads for it, which I believe to be a reasonable assumption because they are all built in the LT family. Maybe I could have used for the supercharged ones the regular head and the performance head for the naturally aspirated ones, but I end up using performance for all of them. And what I found is getting enough power and enough emissions performance out of the naturally aspirated engine was very difficult as compared to the supercharged ones because of the cam profile being, let's say, 35, 40, 45 for the required 460 horsepower to 6.2, as opposed to 5 or 10 for the superchargers. And you were talking in that earlier question about the fact that you are looking at possibilities of making the cam selection a bit more nuanced, but you couldn't, do it in a non-fudged way without, making everybody a hot rodder, trickster god, which is unreasonable to expect out of our onboarding, even with better tutorials, right?
Yeah. No, we're not going to touch cam profile mechanics anymore now.
Well, I was going to say that maybe it makes sense to have some sort of slider. Again, more sliders. Oh my god! But a slider to optimize a cam profile for emissions, because we have a system where where especially with, if you assume that compression has to be realistic to a specific time period, a specific year, we have a problem where on non-dual overhead cam heads, even ones that exist right now and ostensibly pass US emissions, which are stricter than WES 11, unless they're just all buying credits, which they might be, I don't know. We don't have that information, I don't think. I think it is possible to create a system which maybe, let's say, trades mid-range torque, or trades fuel economy, or trades something of the sort in a cam profile for emissions. You could roll it into the slider that does lambda. You could make it separate, because I think the lambda slider has become more specific and you've decided to explicitly identify it
probably
as
would
lambda
have to
slider.
live with the emissions optimization slider or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, but make it so that we can optimize emissions not only from the perspective of the fuel system's fuel delivery, but also from cams, because stuff like overlap, stuff like duration, is very different, as far as I know and understand, in current valve trains from historical ones, specifically to enable emissions compliance.
Yes.
So I don't know how you would take it. How is it at all possible to implement that? But if we want a solution to NA engines being pretty much impossible to emissions tune unless they are unless you put a supercharger on top of them, there's a potential way there.
Well, one thing I would like to point out there is that there are very few naturally aspirated engines out there today.
There's a bunch.
Well, compared to before, there isn't.
If I may jump in
True,
here
true.
to what you said, Texas Slav, the biggest reason why there are a lot of naturally aspirated engines, specifically in the US, is because a lot of these companies are buying massive, massive amounts of emissions and efficiency credits. They are artificially
Or doing
distorting.
EVs.
They've artificially distorted the field substantially for that. And I also might add, if you actually look at the number of naturally aspirated engines in passenger cars, which are under very different emissions rules than pickup trucks, you'll actually find that there are basically no passenger cars made by American brands that have naturally aspirated engines anymore. It's a very, very small handful of them. So,
yeah, it's more of a Japanese thing in our market right now.
So basically,
ironically enough,
when we're looking to a system like this, I think we're kind of moving towards out of the realm of reality and kind of into the realm of fiction with this kind of a request, because there are systems that are external to what's going on and what we model in automation that are causing this distortion in the real world. So the unfortunate thing is what we're seeing with automation, or maybe it is a fortunate thing, is that what we have modeled is reality, unfortunately, and anything that kind of changes that is external forces that we are either unable or are unwilling to model in our game.
Well, the model that I was talking about would leverage fudging factors based on reality if the differences that are introduced by it are insufficient, insignificant, or don't magically fix the NA problem, which they might not. I acknowledge that part, but it's basically you have the option of not adding it beyond an initial purely theoretical mathematical kind of study. You have the option of adding it, which, if it's too much work, is totally unnecessary. But I'm not pitching an idea to fudge numbers into unreality. I'm responding to Kilrob's comments on the fact that currently the way we do fudge cam profiles is not necessarily, fully representative of what they can do. And if
But we are also fudging other aspects which kind of
True.
accommodate that, because what you are talking about mostly, like the cheat factor in terms of cam profiles, is already in the game, and that is VVT. That significantly lowers emissions.
it
And
still
is the
doesn't
way
lower
to
with single
adjust
cam.
the cam profile effectively to something that is cutting down your emissions. That is more or less, also fudge, but it is implemented in the game and it is working as intended, I believe. So I don't see any additional magic factors that could optimize away emissions without effectively requiring what we call a lower cam profile.
Well, that's reasonable, but it's just no further questions in that. What I want to say. Yeah, if what you're saying is that the cam profiles are already well enough optimized to provide the lowest emission numbers for their respective kind of power outputs, then that obviates the need or the point of what I just suggested.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to assume that they are, because emission standards in automotive engineering have played such a major role since the early 70s. So
all
or
the
late
cams
60s for that
all
matter.
the cams are modeled on optimized stuff, anyways.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Regarding VVT, I will say that I still haven't had a single VVT single cam engine have its NOx lowered effectively by VVT. They still increased for some reason.
All right, that's something that we need to look into, if that's the case. But
yeah, that seems to have been it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah, no further questions. Thank you for granting me this amount of time.
you're welcome.
It
Good
was good talk.
There was some discussion about adding other lower quality fuels to automation. Have you given any thought to that beyond just what we have for the 85 RON low quality fuel?
Yeah, I have. That is something that I would like to do. And specifically, that does only concern the start of the game, which at the moment is pretty simple, which is great, by the way. So this is an interesting design question, mostly, because yes, in reality, right after the Second World War, there was a rapid increase in fuel quality towards what we had as basically the current horse piss, which is 85, right? And there were lower quality fuels, but they had a kind of a lifetime of just a few years, and then were phased out, a higher quality came in, and so on. That is quite interesting, because it would require you to rapidly continue developing your engines and get a nice progression curve in the early years in terms of performance beyond what you already see. And it would be realistic in that sense as well. There would be room for it with the UI that we have. And I would say that is something that I would consider adding for more grand campaign stuff, because it's not really that relevant in sandbox, I wouldn't say. It's like, who wants to build specific... Well, there are always a few. Whom am I talking to, right? But there are very limited use cases for those extra shit fuel options, right? At some point, you just run diesel. Like, RON 20, here we go. So that is something that we potentially add for grand campaign play, and that could enhance early game engine design for sure. But it needs to play well, first and foremost. And that's what I mean with the design decision. It is something that you need to consider. Is this adding enough gameplay and little enough complexity that it is a viable feature to have in there? Or is it, as is, a nice simplification of the real world, which nets you a better experience and definitely also better onboarding? Don't forget that start of the campaign is what most people play. in terms of campaign. And then currently it looks like this. They start the campaign, and if they even get to that screen, they really soon quit because they are bankrupt after 3 years or something. And I think that is just another thing that adds on top of that. And this is not a discussion about dumbing down the game, because it is already dumbed down by not having all those extra fuel types. The question is, if it's viable to add that, does it add enough gameplay to warrant the extra complexity? And that is something that remains to be seen, but I'm open to it.
Next question is from Redacted, who we have up on the stage right away.
Hello, thank you for having me. I appreciate the answers to my question earlier, just about the general scope of 2025, 2026. And I did have one more kind of, I guess, somewhat small question. So I've kind of kept up with Der Bayer's series with his Cisalpina, I believe.
Yep.
But I wanted to ask what would be the possibility of implementing some sort of race league system, and obviously not having something like too complex visually, something somewhat akin to the test track feature. But I just wanted to know, like, if that was something you guys were considering, or if it's just kind of too out there, a little too complex to implement. But it could be something, that is utilized to increase sales. Say that in the early days of Rally with the different groups and whatnot, you could submit a car, and that could, based on how it does relative to other cars in that class, it could give you a slight boost in sales or market awareness for that particular category, something like that. So yeah, I just wanted to know what your guys' thoughts on that was.
Sure. There are two approaches, or two things that I need to talk about there. One is the racing aspect of it. And that is something that, as you have heard me talk about in the track editor video that we had on the channel a few months back, that is something that we are considering adding, as in racing and much more in-depth test track stuff. And that's mostly for multiplayer purposes at the moment. The ultimate goal would be to have a BRC style multiplayer mode where you have a time limit and design a car, and then you have testing and qualifying, and then the race, with minor adjustments being able to be done between for your car and so on. At the same time, adhering to randomized rules for that car, as in a race league. So from a racing standpoint, so that would be fleshed out for the multiplayer stuff if we can get there. This is not fully confirmed as this will 100% be there, but it's very likely to be there eventually. Then your question is more about, of course, would such a mode be made use of within the context of a campaign? For that, I will have to take it, to first generalize it. It is similar to asking the question, will there be contracts in campaign for certain things? Like, build me the best taxi, build me the best rally car, build me the best whatever super luxury presidential one-off car, right? Those are basically scenarios. We could call them scenarios where you are building towards specific specifications, then signing off on them, and then have some kind of evaluation that comes with it. That, in my opinion, from all the years I've thought about that since very early on, since more than 10 years ago, what that would imply. Scenario gameplay, I don't know if you were along for when scenarios were a thing, but
Very, very briefly, I
very
kind of
briefly at the
experimented
start.
with them. Yeah.
Right. So basically, scenarios are a crutch to simulate the larger context. They are telling a story, and you're supposed to design something for that story. The thing is, though, that in campaign, you already have the story. The story is your company. So what a scenario, I'm talking very general terms, like design specific general terms, and not car design, but game design general terms. What you're doing is you are coming from a larger context and you're being put into a scenario which is a smaller context. And I think that, I'm not 100% sure, but I would think that that is actually a detriment to campaign gameplay, because the larger context of it is what makes it appealing.
Yeah, no, I see what
You
you're
would
saying.
be
Exactly. Like,
you would be
you don't want to
spending
be put in the
time.
box.
Yeah, exactly. You would be spending time on something that is a sideshow instead of working on the big picture, which you already can do sideshow by playing scenarios directly, by playing multiplayer, or by being more specific, role playing in sandbox. So I'm not sure this would be the right way forward. But what I previously talked about a little bit, or hinted at, with the kind of high scores thing, there might be something that is, for instance, a certain test track in the game. Let's call it the South-Schleife, where your every car is tested against that one, and the best performing car on this one, like the best time of any car that is in production on this one, does provide you with a certain brand prestige benefit. That is more in line with playing the big picture without going into a specific scenario that tries to box you in and then do stuff.
Yeah,
It's more natural to the world in that sense, if you see where I'm coming from.
No, absolutely, because essentially you're going to have your main line, your main, like you said, the storyline, and then you're going to jump into this tiny box for who knows how long, trying to get this one thing done, and then it's like you can come back to it, but you may have lost, hyper focus on this tiny box, and now
Yeah.
this main path is kind of like lost again. So, no, that
Exactly.
absolutely makes sense. So, I really do appreciate that answer.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have another voice question coming up from Blorp. So, welcome.
I have a very small question about when could we get like more fixtures for the interior / like an auto interior thing.
So that's something that's kind of an ongoing thing with automation. We're always looking to add more fixtures to the game, and that's actually one of the focuses that we're kind of shifting some of our contractors toward, is making more fixtures and sort of fewer bodies, because we are kind of at a situation where most of our body needs are covered, but we've also identified lots and lots of areas where we need fixtures. Interior stuff is definitely something we're going to be looking at, because what we do have is, as anybody who's played with building interiors and automation, is it's good to a degree, but you start running into limitations of just what's not there, and then you start having to get really, really creative with using stuff that isn't an interior fixture necessarily as things to build your interiors out of, which is fine for people who have lots of patience and lots of time, but there's a lot of people who just want to slap in a dash, throw in some seats, throw in a steering wheel, and call it good. So there's definitely lots of scope there for us to expand what we have, and it is a project that we are working on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, like for the lazier, something like, I don't know, dashes that should automatically fit, like, I don't know, the diameters of the car that you want, just how to stretch it, like something that would basically just automatically make, I don't know, 1 out of 3 styles of interior for each body would be very nice, but I understood that it would take like a lot of effort.
And it's basically impossible at this stage.
Yeah, true.
As what it would require is to remake to some extent, to revise to a significant extent, all thousands of car bodies that we already have. In terms of that, it is requiring you to have certain control points in there, so that the interior knows what it's supposed to scale to. And that can get however complex you want to make it, but there is a minimum level of complexity there, times, how many bodies do we have now? 5,000 or something? It's insane. So that, unfortunately, would not be possible to make happen with any degree of like automatic adaptation. One thing that we have done with Al-Rilma is that at least you can. The chassis material is now dual-sided, so that you can color the inside material so that you don't have to clad everything on the inside. So that is something that will save you some time, but the automatic placement of fixtures, unfortunately, will not be part of automation.
And actually, to elaborate on a point that Rob just made, I just actually had a look, and we've got 4,200 approximately body variants in automation at this time. So lots and lots of bodies would need to be reworked. Next question comes from Utica. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. Very happy with new updates. So I have very short yes/no basically questions. Are there any plans for taxes based on car size, similar to how you're adding for engine size?
There currently are not, because we are that is kind of the key car / utility vehicle question in a different way of expressing it, right? So there are
in
not
a
supposed to
way-
be any size classes, because we do want to have. I think engine capacity plays a little better. It gives you more interesting incentives than using a morph on a specific car body to make it fit a certain size class. That is like meh.
I would think of wheelbases, to be honest, more
Right.
than exercise itself. And it would if it would be easier to implement, but I don't know how it's added, how it works in backend. Then other ability to see about rival companies. Basically, you see a car and you you would be able to see what engine configuration it uses, like valvetrain, things like that. You have menu when you finish car. You have menu with suspension type, suspension geometry, engines, things like that. Would it be possible to add to see about rival companies?
So
Additional
yes,
information, basically.
yes, definitely that would be possible, because those cars actually exist. Like, they are
Yeah,
not just their stats, but rather those cars are fully designed. They are being built the same way the player would build the car. So that means that we could display those stats, and eventually we do want to, because that is certainly something that would make the competitors feel more lively. And as you have seen as a red thread throughout this conversation that we had tonight, that is something that we do want to improve on. So yes, that is definitely something that we are looking into adding eventually. I think it is less important than some of the other competitor-related features, visualizations that we are planning. But yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks. And the last one about custom categories, basically the ability to customly made all categories. There was discussion before about this, but would it be possible? I don't know how it's made on backend, if you have JSON file or you have how you store information, depends on that. But would it be possible to implement?
Sorry, I think I missed implement what?
So ability to do custom, currently we have market, yes, and ability
custom
to make
markets.
custom.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that is, considering the structure of them. Currently, they are defined via a more or less via CSV. So it's an export from a spreadsheet, and then that is being read in by the game. From experience, that makes it really easy to be moddable eventually. And I think for the longevity of the game in general, such things being possible to change is very important. So I would say that yes, that is something that we, in the long run, would be considering. Right now, we would not want to do that necessarily, because we, you see, we are in a bit of a with a game that isn't finished. You do want to have feedback on what you have made, what you are designing, not on what other people have designed, and what is not really what you are aiming for in terms of vision or not. So that is one example, is the emissions being added, the emission standards, the WES standards being added in Ellisbury and not being changeable at the start of the game. Everyone had the same emission standard, and we got good feedback from that in terms of how that plays and what is difficult, what is not, and so on. If such a feature would be moddable right from the start or possible to turn off, we would not have gotten that feedback, and we wouldn't be able to now improve it further or tweak things. So that is something that is a little tricky, because moddability is great for the longevity of the game, but at the same time, it's kind of makes it harder to develop the game. So a nice medium needs to be found, and I think the nice medium is that once we are going further towards grand campaign stuff, then we would open up moddability, because we have already, with the light campaign, our sandbox, so to say, for testing campaign, we've already tried out most mechanics and know how they work, what doesn't, and then making it moddable makes perfect sense.
We have one last question here, and I think we're going to wrap it up for the day. That is from Elispad Vieas. Welcome to the stage. So Elispad Vieas is asking about some of the remastered bodies and how we still have some very old ones that haven't been remastered yet.
Yeah.
Essentially, most of the bodies we're going to be remodeling are the ones that are either really, really broken, like are actually not functional anymore, and they're the ones that get moved over to the legacy body mod. Those are by far our highest priority to fix, the ones that have broken during the course of updates. Then the next category is the bodies that are, they might have one variant, they might have only one wheelbase, and they're just not very versatile because of that, and they need to be fleshed out. Yeah, so that's
to add like more wheelbases and to like add a more variety of body moldings.
That's again, it's just a matter of capacity and priority, basically. Like, we can only make so many bodies per year, and we can only make so many fixtures per year. So we basically just have to work with sort of what the most important ones are, and then once those are finished, then we get to the next level of priority. And of course, as we update the game through major updates, it becomes, we suddenly get bodies that worked perfectly fine that now no longer work because computers are haunted, and it was a mistake teaching rocks to think. So basically, we have to, sometimes something that was going to be worked on all of a sudden becomes a lower priority because something is broken in the meantime, and we have to work on that one first. And our last question of the day will come from Lucas1037. So Lucas' question, unfortunately he was unable to unmute himself, is, since large and giant factories are not efficient because of production inefficiencies, could they be balanced by allowing giant factories to produce different cars?
Okay, so producing different cars basically is asking for having more than one model in a factory. That would be a complete change of the fundamentals of what the game does in terms of factories, and would complicate things so much that probably just that would add half a year of development time with the rat's tail of consequences that would have. So that's a definite no. But large factories being not efficient, that's an interesting thing. Are you building the correct cars for large factories, is what I'm asking. Because large factories are the most efficient ones in the game. And that is only true for cars without production flags. Large factories and huge factories do not go well together with cars that have special needs. And if you're building special needs cars, then you should consider building them in smaller factories, because that is more hands-on. The scale of the operations are much more in tune with what the car needs. So basically, if you are trying to build a something in a huge factory, you either need to make sure that you have all the add-ons required to drop all the production flags, or you take the downside of having lower production efficiencies involved there. You still have a larger scale of production, which probably overall is still a little bit more efficient, but at some point, definitely not. If you have severe production flags, like 2 limited production or 1 no mass production, large factories are not the way to go. You can increase efficiency in those circumstances by lowering the automation slider for the factory. That will increase the efficiency of the factory. but it will make it more expensive to make that car. So, yes. Large factories can produce up to 5 variants pretty efficiently, I think. So with 6, it starts to get dropped, being low 90%, I believe. But 5 is still well within range, and 4 is very much optimal. And you, of course, can split your model up to be produced in several factories, which is a pretty good way of going about it, especially if you have more premium trims that also have specific production flags. Then you can just put the special needs cars into the factories that are smaller. And usually they have a smaller audience too. So that is a perfect fit. And then you have your mass production cars in the larger factories, which can then benefit from the overall increased production efficiency of the larger factory.
Okay, that was a good question. And also a very good answer, too. So I think at this point we're going to wrap up the session here. So once again, thank you for everybody who showed up. We appreciate all your questions and we appreciate your participation. And with that, it's over to you, Rob, for our catchphrase.
And that catchphrase is, it's late and we need to go. I hope you enjoyed, and I shall see you guys next time.